I think that it would be safe to start working with some opaque white in the bird, because I think the bird is just about done. So let me see if I can find my opaque white, and I will. I usually have difficulty getting the bottle open because I don't use it that often, and it has plenty of opportunity for the lid to get welded on in between uses. I don't use tube white for my opaque white. The tube white is available, but I find it to be very chalky, and it also, I end up throwing away a lot of it because it solidifies in the tube, partly because I don't use enough of it, and partly because of the nature of the paint. So what I do use is, this is Daler and Rowney Pro White. It's a 1 fluid ounce jar of white watercolor. White watercolor is essentially gouache. Gouache is opaque watercolor. So white watercolor by nature is opaque. Oh, look at that! I got it off. So this is a new jar that I've got here, and that there's quite a bit of separation. So the first thing I got to do is to stir it up. Let's see, what do I have for a clean brush? I think I'll use my palette knife actually, and just stir this up. I'm living dangerously doing this right over my painting. So when it's fresh, it has a very nice consistency to it, kind of like heavy cream, and it paints very nicely, and it's opaque enough to really have some punch in where you use it. I try to use it very sparingly. I generally don't like opaque paints, white or otherwise, in my watercolors. I prefer the transparency of the pigments that I use most of the time. Even the earth tones are fairly opaque for transparent watercolors, but they are still transparent watercolors. So gouache is a whole different watercolor medium. I have tremendous respect for people that do gouache well, and I'm not one of them. It really requires a whole different skill set, because any kind of opaque watercolor, you can't do a lot of the techniques that I do all the time, the glazing and yeah, especially the glazing. If you paint with opaque watercolors and then you go back over the area, you're almost certainly going to reactivate it, no matter how delicate you are with your brushwork. It's almost impossible not to reactivate the opaque pigments. And if it's white that we're talking about, which is usually what it is in my paintings, you end up with kind of a chalky film that develops over your painting, which is really not attractive at all. So I always leave any work that I'm going to do with opaque pigments to the very last. So I'm trusting that I'm done with the bird. I'm happy with it, so I'm gonna call it done, except for except for what I'm going to do with the opaque pigments. But I'll have to be very careful with the rest of the work that I do on the painting, hence from here forward, to make sure that I don't go back into the bird by accident, because I don't want to create that chalky film. It has totally the opposite effect of what I want to have with my opaque paints. In general, with my work with opaque paints, it's intended to create a little bit of visual punch, and the chalky film undermines that, if anything. All right, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of my opaque white. I think you can see this. And first I'm going to go into these feathers right here. So the paper that I use is Arches Natural. They do make a bright white also. I've never used it, but because I use natural, the whites aren't really all that white. They're more of a buff. So it allows me the opportunity to add in some true white by using opaque pigments like this, which makes the places that I use it really stand out much more than just the saved white of the paper. Purists will would never use opaque white in a transparent watercolor, and there are shows, juried shows. There's an actual transparent watercolor society that puts on a show, and if you've used any opaque in your painting, you're just disqualified immediately. So I respect that. I think that I think there's room for traditionalists, and there's also room for people who prefer to use tools that are available to them. For me, it's more about capturing a lifelike representation of my subject. I don't care that much about technique. I do care about it, but it's secondary to the goal of creating a lifelike representation of my subject. Okay, I think that's it for the round sable. He says as he goes back into it. Yeah, let's call that done. And now I'm gonna take my grainer. I'm going to use the number 4 once again. There we are. Okay, so this is my number 4 grainer. You're probably familiar with it by now. That's the brush I'm going to use. And first thing I'm going to do is rinse it off thoroughly, because I want to make sure that I don't have any remnants of the dark pigment that I used before last on the brush before I go into my opaque white with it. All right, so now I'm picking up some opaque white. I'm going to bring you over here so you can see the edge, and I'm going to just touch this down. That's what I can do with the grainer. I might use my grainer in in long passages like what I did on the border here, for graining a board or a tree. It might be a good thing to do here, not with white, but it might be an effective technique to use to create the texture of the weathered perch. But most of the time, what I use it for is to create subtle, short passages in an otherwise dark area of the painting. And again, it's easy to go overboard with this and have it start to look gimmicky, but this is working quite nicely. You probably can't see it because it is quite subtle, and it's becoming more subtle as it dries because the white is a little on the stark side when I first brush it on, but as it dries, it's kind of disappearing. It's still there, but it's very subtle. I'm going to move up into the throat and cheek area and do more of the same. Now, you may remember that when I was doing the grainer work with the darker pigments, I mentioned that I like to use both dark and light, and so that's what I'm doing here. I'm going back over the areas that I originally added texture to with the darker pigments to create a counterpoint that is equally subtle but going in the opposite direction. Okay, I think that's good for now, probably forever. I'm happy with the texture that I've created there. So I'm going to call it a day with the opaque white. The only thing that I might want to do is to create a little bit of contrast by painting around some of the areas that I just painted with the white with a darker color. But I think that it's probably going to be good just the way it is. So maybe you can see the very subtle white brushwork that I did in the breast and on the wings and in the face and the throat and the cheek. And I think that's a wrap for today. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.